Robert James Fischer, March 9, 1943 – January 17, 2008, was an American chess grandmaster and the 11th world chess champion. Many consider him to be the greatest chess player of all time. In 1972, he captured the World Chess Championship from Boris Spassky of the USSR in a match held in Reykjavík, Iceland, publicized as a Cold War confrontation, which attracted more worldwide interest than any chess championship before or since. In 1975, Fischer refused to defend his title when an agreement could not be reached with FIDE, the game's international governing body, over one of the conditions for the match. This resulted in Soviet GM Anatoly Karpov, who had won the qualifying candidates cycle, becoming the new world champion by default under FIDE rules. Fischer showed skill at an early age. At 13, he won a brilliancy that became known as the game of the century. Starting at age 14, Fischer played in 8 United States championships, winning each by at least a 1-point margin. At 15, Fischer became both the youngest grandmaster up to that time and the youngest candidate for the World Championship. At age 20, Fischer won the 1963-64 U.S. Championship with 11 elevenths, the only perfect score in the history of the tournament. His book My 60 Memorable Games, published in 1969, is regarded as a classic work of chess literature. Fischer won the 1970 interzonal tournament by a record 3.5-point margin and won 20 consecutive games, including 2 unprecedented 6-0 sweeps in the candidates' matches. In July 1971, he became the first official FIDE number 1 rated player. After forfeiting his title as world champion, Fischer became reclusive and sometimes erratic, disappearing from both competitive chess and the public eye. In 1992, he re-emerged to win an unofficial rematch against Spassky. It was held in Yugoslavia, which was under a United Nations embargo at the time. His participation led to a conflict with the U.S. government, which warned Fischer that his participation in the match would violate an executive order imposing U.S. sanctions on Yugoslavia, and ultimately issued a warrant for his arrest. After that, he lived his life as an émigré. In 2004, he was arrested in Japan and held for several months for using a passport that had been revoked by the U.S. government. Eventually, he was granted an Icelandic passport and citizenship by a special act of the Icelandic Althing, allowing him to live in Iceland until his death in 2008. Fischer made numerous lasting contributions to chess. In the 1990s, he patented a modified chess timing system that added a time increment after each move, now a standard practice in top tournament and match play. He also invented Fiskirindum, a new variant of chess known today as Chess 960. Early years. Bobby Fischer was born at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, Illinois, on March 9, 1943. His birth certificate listed his father as Hans Gerhard Fischer, also known as Gerardo Liebscher, a German biophysicist. His mother, Regina Wender Fischer, was a U.S. citizen, born in Switzerland. Her parents were Polish Jews. Raised in St. Louis, Missouri, Regina became a teacher, registered nurse, and later a physician. After graduating from college in her teens, Regina traveled to Germany to visit her brother. It was there she met geneticist and future Nobel Prize winner Hermann Joseph Müller, who persuaded her to move to Moscow to study medicine. She enrolled at IM Sichanov First Moscow State Medical University, where she met Hans Gerhardt, whom she married in November 1933. In 1938, Hans Gerhardt and Regina had a daughter, Joan Fischer. The re-emergence of anti-Semitism under Stalin prompted Regina to go with Joan to Paris, where Regina became an English teacher. The threat of a German invasion led her and Joan to go to the United States in 1939. Hans Gerhardt attempted to follow the pair but, at that time, his German citizenship barred him from entering the United States. Regina and Hans Gerhardt had separated in Moscow, although they did not officially divorce until 1945. At the time of her son's birth, Regina was homeless and shuttled to different jobs and schools around the country to support her family. She engaged in political activism, and raised both Bobby and Joan as a single parent. In 1949, the family moved to Brooklyn, New York City, where she studied for her master's degree in nursing and subsequently began working in that field. Paul Nemenyi as Fischer's father. Sources implying that Paul Nemenyi, a Hungarian Jewish mathematician and physicist and an expert in fluid and applied mechanics, was Fischer's biological father were first made public in a 2002 investigation by Peter Nicholas and Clea Benson of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Throughout the 1950s, the FBI investigated Regina and her circle for her alleged communist sympathies, as well as her previous life in Moscow. FBI files identify Paul Nemenyi as Bobby Fischer's biological father, showing that Hans Gerhardt Fischer never entered the United States, having been refused admission by U.S. immigration officials due to his alleged communist sympathies. Not only were Regina and Nemenyi reported to have had an affair in 1942, but Nemenyi made monthly child support payments to Regina and paid for Bobby's schooling until his own death in 1952. Nemenyi had lodged complaints with social workers, saying he was concerned about the way that Regina was raising Bobby, to the point that, on at least one occasion, Nemenyi broke down in tears. Later on, Bobby told the Hungarian chess player Zita Rajcsányi that Paul Nemenyi would sometimes show up at the family's Brooklyn apartment and take him on outings. After Paul Nemenyi died in 1952, Regina Fischer wrote a letter to Nemenyi's first son, Peter, asking if Paul had left money for Bobby in his will. Bobby was sick 2 days with fever and sore throat, and of course a doctor or medicine was out of the question. I don't think Paul would have wanted to leave Bobby this way and would ask you most urgently to let me know if Paul left anything for Bobby. On one occasion, Regina told a social worker that the last time she had ever seen Hans Gerhardt Fischer was in 1939, 4 years before Bobby was born. On another occasion, she told the same social worker she had traveled to Mexico to see Hans Gerhardt in June 1942 and that Bobby was conceived during that meeting. According to Bobby Fischer's brother-in-law, Russell Targ, who was married to Bobby's half-sister, Joan, for 40 years, Regina concealed the fact that Nemenyi was Bobby's father because she wanted to avoid the stigma of an out-of-wedlock birth. Chess beginnings. Impoverished childhood. In March 1949, 6-year-old Bobby and his sister Joan learned how to play chess using the instructions from a set bought at a candy store. When Joan lost interest in chess and Regina did not have time to play, it left Fischer to play many of his first games against himself. When the family vacationed at Patchogue, Long Island, New York, that summer, Bobby found a book of old chess games and studied it intensely. Fischer biographer Frank Brady describes the family's move from Manhattan to Brooklyn in 1950. In the fall of 1950, Regina moved the family out of Manhattan and across the bridge to Brooklyn, where she rented an inexpensive apartment near the intersection of Union and Franklin Streets. It was only temporary, she was trying to get closer to a better neighborhood. Robbed of her medical degree in Russia because of the war, she was now determined to acquire a nursing diploma. As soon as she enrolled in the Prospect Heights School of Nursing, the peripatetic Fischer family, citizens of nowhere, moved once again its 10th transit in 6 years to a $52 a month 2-bedroom flat at 560 Lincoln Place in Brooklyn. The family resided in apartment Q, a small, basic, but habitable apartment. It was there that Fischer soon became so engrossed in the game that Regina feared he was spending too much time alone. As a result, on November 14, 1950, Regina sent a postcard to the Brooklyn Eagle newspaper, seeking to place an ad inquiring whether other children of Bobby's age might be interested in playing chess with him. The paper rejected her ad because no one could figure out how to classify it, but forwarded her inquiry to Herman Helms, the Dean of American Chess, who told her that Master Max Pavey, former Scottish champion, would be giving a simultaneous exhibition on January 17, 1951. Fischer played in the exhibition. Although he held on for 15 minutes, even drawing a crowd of onlookers, he eventually lost to the chess master. One of the spectators was Brooklyn Chess Club president, Carmine Nigro, an American chess expert of near master strength and an instructor. Nigro was so impressed with Fischer's play that he introduced him to the club and began teaching him. Fischer noted of his time with Nigro, Mr. Nigro was possibly not the best player in the world, but he was a very good teacher. Meeting him was probably a decisive factor in my going ahead with chess. Nigro hosted Fischer's first chess tournament at his home in 1952. In the summer of 1955, Fischer, then 12 years old, joined the Manhattan Chess Club, the strongest chess club in the country. Fischer's relationship with Nigro lasted until 1956, when Nigro moved away. Mentorship from Lombardy. Nigro introduced Fischer to future grandmaster William Lombardy, and, starting in September 1954, Lombardy began coaching Fischer in private. "We spent hours in our sessions, simply playing over quality games," said Lombardy. "I tried to instill in Bobby the secret of my own speedy rise. Eidetic imagery and total immersion." Based on a 1956 game Lombardy played against Povilas Vaitinus, in which he agreed to a draw offer after only 13 moves, Lombardy told Fischer, "Do not accept draw offers. For an ambitious and talented player, accepting a draw is death to a top result. Opponents fear an uncompromising opponent and thus make more mistakes. Act as I advise and do not copy my timidity." Lombardy played a key part in Fischer's becoming world champion. He was Fischer's aide at Portoro where they analyzed Fischer's games. He was Fischer's second in Reykjavík, where he analyzed with Fischer, and helped keep Fischer in the match. The Hawthorn Chess Club. In June 1956, Fischer began attending the Hawthorn Chess Club, based in Master John Jack W. Collins' home. For years it was believed that Collins was Fischer's teacher and coach, even though Collins stated that he did not teach Fischer. It is now believed that Collins was Fischer's mentor, not his teacher or coach. Fischer played thousands of blitz and offhand games with Collins and other strong players, studied the books in Collins' large chess library, and ate almost as many dinners at Collins' home as his own. Future Grandmaster Arnold Denker was also a mentor to young Bobby, often taking him to watch the New York Rangers play hockey at Madison Square Garden. Bobby enjoyed those treats and never forgot them. The two became lifelong friends. Young champion. In 1956, Fischer experienced a meteoric rise in his playing strength. On the 10th national rating list of the United States Chess Federation, USCF, published on May 20, 1956, Fischer's rating was 1,726, more than 900 points below top-rated Samuel Reshevsky, 2,663. In March 1956, the Log Cabin Chess Club of Orange, New Jersey, took Fischer on a tour to Cuba, where he gave a 12-board simultaneous exhibition at Havana's Capablanca Chess Club, winning 10 games and drawing 2. On this tour the club played a series of matches against other clubs. Fischer played second board, behind international master Norman Whitaker. Whitaker and Fischer were the leading scorers for the club, each scoring 5½ points out of 7 games. In July 1956, Fischer won the U.S. Junior Chess Championship, scoring 8.5/10 at Philadelphia to become the youngest ever junior champion at age 13. At the 1956 U.S. Open Chess Championship in Oklahoma City, he scored 8.5/12 to tie for 4 8th places, with Arthur Bisguier winning. In the first Canadian Open Chess Championship at Montreal 1956, he scored 7/10 to tie for 8 12th places, with Larry Evans winning. In November, Fischer played in the 1956 Eastern States Open Championship in Washington, D.C., tying for second with William Lombardy, Nicholas Rossolimo, and Arthur Feuerstein, with Hans Berliner taking first by a half point. Fischer accepted an invitation to play in the third Lessing J. Rosenwald Trophy tournament in New York City, 1956, a premier tournament limited to the 12 players considered the best in the country. Although Fischer's rating was not among the top 12 in the country, he received entry by special consideration. Playing against top opposition, the 13-year-old Fischer could only score 4.5/11, tying for 8 9th place. Yet, he won the Brilliancy Prize for his immortal game against international master Donald Byrne, in which Fischer sacrificed his queen to unleash an unstoppable attack. Hans Kmoch called it the game of the century, writing, "The following game, a stunning masterpiece of combination play performed by a boy of 13 against a formidable opponent, matches the finest on record in the history of chess prodigies." According to Frank Brady, the game of the century has been talked about, analyzed, and admired for more than 50 years, and it will probably be a part of the canon of chess for many years to come. In reflecting on his game a while after it occurred, Bobby was refreshingly modest. "I just made the moves I thought were best. I was just lucky." In 1957, Fischer played a two-game match against former world champion Max Yowie at New York, losing 1/2 1/1/2. On the USCF's 11th national rating list, published on May 5, 1957, Fischer was rated 2231/500 points higher than his rating a year before. This made him the country's youngest ever chess master, up to that point. In July, he successfully defended his U.S. junior title, scoring 8.5/9 at San Francisco. As a result of his strong tournament results, Fischer's rating went up to 2,298, making him among the top 10 active players in the country. In August, he scored 10/12 at the U.S. Open Chess Championship in Cleveland, winning on tie-breaking points over Arthur Bisguier. This made Fischer the youngest ever U.S. Open champion. He won the New Jersey Open Championship, scoring 6.5/7. He then defeated the young Filipino master Rodolfo Tan Cardoso 6-2 in a New York match sponsored by Pepsi-Cola. Wins first U.S. title. Based on Fischer's rating and strong results, the USCF invited him to play in the 1957-58 U.S. Championship. The tournament included such luminaries as six-time U.S. champion Samuel Reykjavík, defending U.S. champion Arthur Bisguier, and William Lombardy, who in August had won the World Junior Championship with the only perfect score, 11-0, in the history of the event. Bisguier predicted that Fischer would finish slightly over the center mark. Despite all the predictions to the contrary, Fischer scored 8 wins and 5 draws to win the tournament by a 1-point margin, with 10.5/13. Still 2 months shy of his 15th birthday, Fischer became the youngest ever U.S. champion. Since the championship that year was also the U.S. Zonal Championship, Fischer's victory earned him the title of International Master. Fischer's victory in the U.S. Championship sent his rating up to 2,626, making him the second highest rated player in the United States, behind only Reykjavík, 2,713, and qualified him to participate in the 1958 Portero Interzonal, the next step toward challenging the world champion. Grandmaster, candidate, author. Bobby wanted to go to Moscow. At his pleading, Regina wrote directly to the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, requesting an invitation for Bobby to participate in the World Youth and Student Festival. The reply affirmative came too late for him to go. Regina did not have the money to pay the airfare, but in the following year Fischer was invited onto the game show I've Got a Secret, where, thanks to Regina's efforts, the producers of the show arranged 2 round-trip tickets to Russia. Once in Russia, Fischer was invited by the Soviet Union to Moscow, where international master Lev Abramov would serve as a guide to Bobby and his sister, Joan. Upon arrival, Fischer immediately demanded that he be taken to the Moscow Central Chess Club, where he played speed chess with 2 young Soviet masters, Evgeny Vasyukov and Alexander Nikitin, winning every game. Chess author V.I. Linder writes about the impression Fischer gave Grandmaster Vladimir Alatortsev when he played blitz against the Soviet masters, back in 1958, in the Central Chess Club. Vladimir Alatortsev saw a tall, angular 15-year-old youth, who in blitz games, crushed almost everyone who crossed his path. Alatortsev was no exception, losing all 3 games. He was astonished by the play of the young American Robert Fischer, his fantastic self-confidence, amazing chess erudition and simply brilliant play. On arriving home, Vladimir said in admiration to his wife, "This is the future world champion." Fischer demanded to play against Mikhail Botvinnik, the reigning world champion. When told that this was impossible, Fischer asked to play Kers. Finally, Tigran Petrosyan was, on a semi-official basis, summoned to the club, where he played speed games with Fischer, winning the majority. When Bobby discovered that he wasn't going to play any formal games, he went into a not-so-silent rage, saying he was fed up with these Russian pigs, which angered the Soviets who saw Fischer as their honored guest. It was then that the Yugoslavian chess officials offered to take in Fischer and Joan as early guests to the interzonal. Fischer took them up on the offer, arriving in Yugoslavia to play 2 short training matches against masters Dragoljub Janoevi and Milan Matolovic. Fischer drew both games against Janoevi and then defeated Matolovic in Belgrade by 2-1/2 1-1/2. The top 6 finishers in the interzonal would qualify for the candidates tournament. Most observers doubted that a 15-year-old with no international experience could finish among the 6 qualifiers at the interzonal, but Fischer told journalist Miro Radoicic, "I can draw with the grandmasters, and there are half a dozen patzers in the tournament I reckon to beat." Despite some bumps in the road and a problematic start, Fischer succeeded in his plan. After a strong finish, he ended up with 12/20, plus 6-2 equals 12, to tie for 5-6th. The Soviet Grandmaster Yuri Averbakh observed, "In the struggle at the board this youth, almost still a child, showed himself to be a full-fledged fighter, demonstrating amazing composure, precise calculation, and devilish resourcefulness. I was especially struck not even by his extensive opening knowledge, but his striving everywhere to seek new paths." In Fischer's play an enormous talent was noticeable, and in addition one sensed an enormous amount of work on the study of chess. Soviet Grandmaster David Bronstein said of Fischer's time in Portoro, "It was interesting for me to observe Fischer, but for a long time I couldn't understand why this 15-year-old boy played chess so well." Fischer became the youngest person ever to qualify for the candidates and the youngest ever Grandmaster at 15 years, 6 months, 1 day. By then everyone knew we had a genius on our hands. Before the candidates tournament, Fischer won the 1958-59 U.S. Championship, scoring 8-1/2/11. He tied for third, with Borislav Ivikov, in Mar del Plata, scoring 10/14, a half-point behind Ludwig Pikaman and Miguel Nadorf. He tied for 4-6th in Santiago, scoring 7-1/2/12, behind Ivikov, Pikaman, and Herman Pilnik. At the Zurich International Tournament, spring 1959, Fischer finished a point behind future world champion Mikhail Tal and a half-point behind Yugoslavian grandmaster Svetozar Gligoric. Although Fischer had ended his formal education at age 16, dropping out of Erasmus Hall High School in Brooklyn, he subsequently taught himself several foreign languages so he could read foreign chess periodicals. According to Latvian chess master Alexander Koblenks, even he and Tal could not match the commitment that Fischer had made to chess. Recalling a conversation from the tournament, "Tell me, Bobby," Tal continued, "what do you think of the playing style of Larissa Volpert? She's too cautious. But you have another girl, Dmitrieva. Her games do appeal to me." Here we were left literally open-mouthed in astonishment. Misha and I have looked at thousands of games, but it never even occurred to us to study the games of our women players. How could we find the time for this? Yet Bobby, it turns out, had found the time. Until late 1959, Fischer had dressed atrociously for a champion, appearing at the most august and distinguished national and international events in sweaters and corduroys. A director of the Manhattan Chess Club had once banned Fischer for not being properly accoutred, forcing Denker to intercede to get him reinstated. Now, encouraged by pal Benko to dress more smartly, Fischer began buying suits from all over the world, hand-tailored and made to order. He told journalist Ralph Ginsberg that he had 17 hand-tailored suits and that all of his shirts and shoes were handmade. At the age of 16, Fischer finished equal 5th out of 8, the top non-Soviet player, at the 1959 Candidates Tournament in Bled/Zagreb/Belgrade, Yugoslavia, scoring 12.5/28. He was outclassed by tournament winner Tal, who won all 4 of their individual games. That year, Fischer released his first book of collected games, Bobby Fischer's Games of Chess, published by Simon & Schuster. Drops out of school. Fischer's interest in chess became more important than schoolwork, to the point that by the time he reached the 4th grade, he'd been in and out of 6 schools. In 1952, Regina got Bobby a scholarship, based on his chess talent and astronomically high IQ, to Brooklyn Community Woodward. Fischer later attended Erasmus Hall High School at the same time as Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond. In 1959, its student council awarded him a gold medal for his chess achievements. The same year, Fischer dropped out of high school when he turned 16, the earliest he could legally do so. He later explained to Ralph Ginsberg, "You don't learn anything in school." When Fischer was 16, his mother moved out of their apartment to pursue medical training. Her friend Joan Rodker, who had met Regina when the two were idealistic communists living in Moscow in the 1930s, believes that Fischer resented his mother for being mostly absent as a mother, a communist activist and an admirer of the Soviet Union, and that this led to his hatred for the Soviet Union. In letters to Rodker, Fischer's mother states her desire to pursue her own obsession of training in medicine and writes that her son would have to live in their Brooklyn apartment without her. It sounds terrible to leave a 16-year-old to his own devices, but he is probably happier that way. The apartment was on the edge of Bedford-Stuyvesant, a neighborhood that had one of the highest homicide and general crime rates in New York City. Despite the alienation from her son, Regina, in 1960, protested the practices of the American Chess Foundation and staged a 5-hour protest in front of the White House, urging President Dwight D. Eisenhower to send an American team to that year's Chess Olympiad, set for Leipzig, East Germany, behind the Iron Curtain, and to help support the team financially. 1960–61. In 1960, Fischer tied for first place with Soviet star Boris Spassky at the Strong Mar del Plata tournament in Argentina, winning by a 2-point margin, scoring 13.5/15, plus 13.1 = 1, ahead of David Bronstein. Fischer lost only to Spassky. This was the start of their lifelong friendship. Fischer experienced the only failure in his competitive career at the Buenos Aires tournament, 1960, finishing with 8.5/19, plus 3.5 = 11, far behind winners Viktor Korchnoi and Samuel Reykjavík with 13/19. According to Larry Evans, Fischer's first sexual experience was with a girl to whom Evans introduced him during the tournament. Pal Benko says that Fischer did horribly in the tournament because he got caught up in women and sex. Afterwards, Fischer said he'd never mix women and chess together, and kept the promise. Fischer concluded 1960 by winning a small tournament in Reykjavík with 4.5/5, and defeating Klaus Darga in an exhibition game in West Berlin. In 1961, Fischer started a 16-game match with Reykjavík, split between New York and Los Angeles. Reykjavík, 32 years Fischer's senior, was considered the favorite, since he had far more match experience and had never lost a set match. After 11 games and a tie score, 2 wins apiece with 7 draws, the match ended prematurely due to a scheduling dispute between Fischer and match organizer and sponsor Jacqueline Piatigorsky. Reykjavík was declared the winner by default and received the winner's share of the prize fund. Fischer was second in a superclass field, behind only former world champion Tal, at Bled, 1961. Yet, Fischer defeated Tal head-to-head for the first time in their individual game, scored 3.5/4 against the Soviet contingent, and finished as the only unbeaten player, with 13.5/19, plus 8.0 = 11. 1962, success, setback, accusations of collusion. Fischer won the 1962 Stockholm Interzonal by a 2.5 point margin, going undefeated, with 17.5/22, plus 13.0 = 9. He was the first non-Soviet player to win an interzonal since FIDE instituted the tournament in 1948. Russian grandmaster Alexander Kotov said of Fischer, "I have discussed Fischer's play with Max Yowie and Gideon Stolberg. All of us, experienced tournament old-timers, were surprised by Fischer's endgame expertise. When a young player is good at attacking or at combinations, this is understandable, but a faultless endgame technique at the age of 19 is something rare. I can recall only one other player who at that age was equally skillful at endgames, Vasily Smyslov." Fischer's victory made him a favorite for the candidates tournament in Curacao. Yet, despite his result in the interzonal, Fischer only finished 4th out of 8 with 14/27, plus 8.7 = 12, far behind Tigran Petrosyan, 17.5/27, F.M. Geller, and Paul Kiers, both 17/27. Tal fell very ill during the tournament, and had to withdraw before completion. Fischer, a friend of Tal, was the only contestant who visited him in the hospital. Accuses Soviets of collusion. Following his failure in the 1962 candidates, Fischer asserted, in an August 20, 1962 Sports Illustrated article, entitled "The Russians Have Fixed World Chess," that 3 of the 5 Soviet players, Tigran Petrosyan, Paul Kiers, and F.M. Geller, had a pre-arranged agreement to quickly draw their games against each other in order to conserve their energy for playing against Fischer. It is generally thought that this accusation is correct. Fischer stated that he would never again participate in a candidates tournament, since the format, combined with the alleged collusion, made it impossible for a non-Soviet player to win. Following Fischer's article, FIDE, in late 1962, voted to implement a radical reform of the playoff system, replacing the candidates tournament with a format of one-on-one knockout matches, the format that Fischer would dominate in 1971. Fischer defeated Bent Larsen in a summer 1962 exhibition game in Copenhagen for Danish TV. Later that year, Fischer beat Bogdan Sliva in a team match against Poland in Warsaw. In the 1962-63 U.S. Championship, Fischer experienced his first single-game loss, to Edmar Mednes, in round 1. Biskier was in excellent form, and Fischer caught up to him only at the end. Tied at 7-3, the two met in the final round. Biskier stood well in the middle game, but blundered, handing Fischer his fifth consecutive U.S. championship. Semi-retirement in the mid-1960s. Influenced by ill will over the aborted 1961 match against Reykjavík, Fischer declined an invitation to play in the 1963 Piatigorsky Cup tournament in Los Angeles, which had a world-class field. He instead played in the Western Open in Bay City, Michigan, which he won with 7-1/2/8. In August-September 1963, Fischer won the New York State Championship at Poughkeepsie, with 7/7, his first perfect score, ahead of Biskier and Sherwin. In the 1963-64 U.S. Championship, Fischer achieved his second perfect score, this time against the top-ranked chess players in the country. This tournament became, as they say, the stuff of legend. The fact that Fischer won his sixth U.S. title was no surprise. The way he did it was spectacular. One by one Fischer mowed down the opposition as he cut an 11-0 swathe through the field, to demonstrate convincingly to the opposition that he was now in a class by himself. This result brought Fischer heightened fame, including a profile in Life magazine. Sports Illustrated diagrammed each of the 11 games in its article, The Amazing Victory Streak of Bobby Fischer. Such extensive chess coverage was groundbreaking for the top American sports magazine. His 11-0 win in the 1963-64 championship is the only perfect score in the history of the tournament, and one of about 10 perfect scores in high-level chess tournaments ever. David Hooper and Kenneth Wyld called it the most remarkable achievement of this kind. Fischer recalls, motivated by my lopsided result, 11-0, drive. Kamach congratulated Evans, the runner-up, on winning the tournament, and then he congratulated me on winning the exhibition. International master Anthony Sadie recalled his last round encounter with the undefeated Fischer.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.